So we went to that landowner's home, asked for permission to use a phone. We called Omaha, told them we were coming back, loaded everything in the vehicles, didn't really put it away very nicely. A lot of it was just soaking wet. And we headed back. We stopped in Ord. There was a Pizza Hut there along the highway, pretty much right in the middle of Ord.
Still there.
Yeah. It's kind of on the highway kind of curves there.
Yeah.
And I went in first, and told them what had happened to us. I said, will you take us in bedraggled condition? They said, well, sure. So we went in, had pizza, and then took off for Omaha. We got to the church at about 1:30 in the morning. And that's a Sunday morning, so good old me, I go home, clean up, get a little sleep, and then I show up for church services the next morning. We had a second pastor, and he was doing it anyway, but I felt, oh, if I'm in town, I better show up. We had lots of interesting times with the youth, and they were all right. The first reading for this Sunday, and the Sunday coming up is kind of a twofer. It's Sunday of the Passion and also Palm Sunday, but the first reading is pretty much a traditional Palm Sunday reading. It's Zechariah 9, verses 9 through 12. But before we get to that specific reading, I want to give you a little bit of background on Zechariah, and you're also going to hear a little bit about Haggai, Zechariah is the longest of the minor prophets. It's 14 chapters long, and it divides into two parts. Chapters 1 through 8 are basically visions, and they kind of fit more with Haggai. Sometimes even referred to as First Zechariah, but that's a later development. Zechariah was not originally written published in two separate parts. There are other content things that are similar, like the name of the high priest in Jerusalem and the governor, Zerubbabel. The second section of Zechariah, if you look at chapter 9:1, before the verse even starts, there's the title, An Oracle. If you look at chapter 12, even before verse 1 starts, there's the title, An Oracle. And also the beginning of Haggai, chapter 1, verse 1, An Oracle. So, Zechariah is in the Middle East called Jamnia, Jamnia, and that's when they decide what books are going to be their Bible, and that's the 24 that turns out to be our 39. The formation of the Christian canon, like, or what you would say the New Testament, is also equally in flux and somewhat chaotic, because after Jesus, you've got the Gospels written, and then the epistles, and then some other books, and then Gamma. The best way I can describe this to you is Gamma Delta was a college-age Walther League, and the chapters were in congregations that were close to campuses. I grew up at Emmanuel Lawrence, and the University of Kansas is there, so we had a Gamma Delta chapter, and they would meet and do their own activities, and they'd have their own group officers, things like that. Well, Gamma Delta is 2 Greek letters of the alphabet, but they stand for 2 words. Gamma, gnosis. Did the church provide for those older members? Older in the sense of being out of high school. The church felt it wasn't right to drop them from Walther League, so as long as they were single, not married, they were part of the Walther League. I didn't know this until at my first parish in Kansas. It was a rural situation, and of course we got to know people and listen to their stories, and they told us, yeah, we were 45 years old and still going to Walther League. Well, that shocked me, but then they explained it to me. It helps me remember. The second half of the book, 9 through 14, a little harder to date. It does even refer, and I'll point this out when we read our reading for Sunday, it even refers to Greeks. Well, does that mean that this is somehow after Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, so maybe the second half of Zechariah comes from a later time than the first half. It's hard to know that for sure, but there certainly are some hints that kind of point in that direction. And that part of the book, and our reading comes from that part of the book, the second part, chapter 9 through 14. Chapter 9 has almost a utopian view of Israel and its king, but as you'll see in the reading, whoever's riding in, your king, is it God himself? Is it an Israelite king? Is it a secular leader of some kind that does things, like the return of the exiles was facilitated by Cyrus the Great? He wasn't a Jew, he was a Persian. So, but somehow God stops these enemies, defeats them, and will transform Jerusalem into some kind of Eden. That all of that is in Zechariah, and I think that makes Zechariah a very interesting read, whether you're in the first 8 chapters or the last 6. It doesn't make any difference. What was the word I was going to go to? Canon. Maybe you've heard me say that word from time to time, the Old Testament canon, the New. I think there was a gospel that he liked, and maybe the book of Acts, but then pretty much all he accepted was anything from Paul. None of the others, not 1st and 2nd Peter, not 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, not Jude, not Revelation. It was pretty much a gospel in Paul. But he didn't get very far with that. Okay, so when you look at chapter 9, you see the title there, right? An oracle. Then, if you go to chapter 12, verse 1, you see the title, An Oracle. 1 through 17, this is the third part of chapter 9. The theme is Lord Yahweh liberates the dispersed Israelites and leads them home. By the way, that makes me think of another quick aside. Passover's coming up. sundown Saturday. This Saturday is Passover. And although in Israel it's a week, so it's from, and let's figure this one out. Now, you can probably see from your page the way this is laid out. Look, for example, so Zion and Jerusalem are the same city. Hanging around to get fed. The foal of a donkey. So here it's not two animals, it's one. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and that is one way in our Old Testament to refer to the northern kingdom, also known as Israel, but sometimes referred to as Ephraim because that's one of the tribal territories in the northern kingdom, although technically it's okay. Does that Israel mean just the north, or does it mean all 12? Because all 12 were also known as, collectively as Israel, or from our perspective, ancient Israel. Now, riding on a donkey. That is meaningful for what it is not. This king doesn't ride in on a war horse. He rides in on a non-military, and if you didn't get it from 9, then you get it from 10. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim. A chariot is an instrument of war. It's not a streetcar to get to the grocery store. It's an instrument of war. It didn't shoot ballistically, but it's an instrument of war, just like a tank would be an instrument of war. It was in Iraq. As for you also, and now this seems to be addressing the people directly, because of the blood of my covenant with you, so this is the prophet speaking as if God is speaking, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit, because this is going to be a utopian existence. Waterless pit is kind of glorified poetic language for a dungeon. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners